Okay. Now let's go with Fran Ramírez.
Perdona, com funciona això?
We have two talks. We will have 5 minutes to short questions, and afterwards we will discuss, or perhaps, well, we'll find a way to interact with all the people. Okay. The talk will be operational research and optimization processes in studies of marine species, movements, and connectivity between marine habitats. Fran?
Very good. Thank you very much. Bon dia a tothom. My name is Fran Ramírez, and as you know, I'm coming from the Institute of Marine Science. I'm aware this is very typical, but I would like to highlight that it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me, for giving this talk, which the title is the one you can see here. Well, this talk is about animal movement, how animals move across particular seascapes, across particular landscapes, while looking for resources, mainly food resources, but also other important resources, important for them, like suitable habitats for breeding, suitable habitats for resting, suitable habitats for spending the winter, etc. And it's also about how these animals use particular environmental features, like winds, like ocean currents, for optimizing these travels by minimizing the cost of moving across these seascapes, across these landscapes. Well, when talking about animal movements, I think that most of these movements can be classified into two main groups. On the one hand, we have this kind of relatively short distance movements that many species undertake while looking for food resources. This is particularly true for those species that we call central place foragers, that are species, mainly colonial species, that during a particular period of their annual cycle, during the breeding period, are closely linked to a breeding site, because there they have their nests, their burrows, their youngs, their chicks, etc. So these guys, frequently, they have to leave their breeding sites, they have to look for these resources, and then they have to come back to these breeding sites for feeding the chicks, incubating their eggs, etc. This is what we usually call the foraging movements. And we come back later on to these movements, but now I would like to focus on what, to me, is one of the most fascinating events in nature. I'm talking about this sometimes huge distance seasonal migration that many animals undertake between the areas where they breed and the areas where they spend the winter. Okay? These are the migratory movements. Well, animal migration is widely spread in animal kingdom. I mean, many different species undertake these kind of migrations, from small invertebrates like these monarch butterflies that migrate from the north of America, from Canada and the United States to the central Mexico, where they breed, all the way to these large terrestrial mammals, the wildebeest, the seabirds that you can see here crossing these rivers and fighting against crocodiles while they take these seasonal migrations. There are migratory species in many different latitudes. In the northern regions, we also have migratory species like these caribous, many different flying species, flying mammals like bats. Many species of bats are also migratory species. And in the marine environment, we also have many different migratory species, like many species of tuna, whales, sea turtles, etc. But within the animal kingdom, I think that birds in general and seabirds in particular are widely considered as a paradigmatic example of migratory species, and also are widely considered as ideal case studies, ideal model species to investigate how animal migration occurs and how these animals interact with these environmental features for doing these large distance migrations. Just to give you some information, about 40 or 50% of birds are migratory species, which means that more than 4,000 species make these long distance migrations. And this is a nice example of a migratory seabird. This species called the Arctic tern. And it has a record because it has the longest migration in the world. Because you can see here in this red arrow, this species every single year move from the Arctic, where they breed, to the Antarctica, where they spend the winter, and then come back to the Arctic. And this is not an exemption. It's not also the rule, but it's not an exemption. There are many other different species that undertake different or similar migration. Many of them in the terrestrial environment, but also many of them in the marine environment. This is the example, for example, of this short Alishi water, the species you can see here that breed in Australia and New Zealand, and every single year circumnavigate the whole Pacific Ocean. So huge migrations. And I think when talking about migration, there are two main questions we can ask. The first question is why? Why do species make this kind of migrations? And I think the answer is quite simple, because they have to adapt to seasonal changes in food availability. Here in this video, you can see patterns in both dimension, spatial and temporal dimension, of chlorophyll concentration. Chlorophyll concentration is a parameter that can be measured from satellites, and we usually use this parameter as a surrogate, as a proxy to food availability. And as you can see in the video, the dynamic of this parameter is highly dynamic, both in space and in time. So during the spring and during the summer, the chlorophyll concentration peak in the northern regions, and that's mainly the reason because many of these animals breed and spend the spring and the summer in these northern regions. But then, during the boreal winter and the austral summer, this chlorophyll concentration and hence this food availability decrease in the northern regions and increase in the southern regions. And that's mainly the reason because many of these animals move to the south just to take profit of these new feeding opportunities. And the other question is how? How can these species can make this long distance migration? How they can face the cost associated to this migration? And I think that the answer is also quite simple, at least conceptually, because they take profit of many environmental features like winds, like ocean currents, depending on the species, to minimize the cost associated to this movement. And this is quite easy to understand. I mean, this is quite easy to understand conceptually, but it's very, very challenging to demonstrate empirically. And again, here, seabirds can emerge also as an ideal model species to investigate these kind of issues. And this is because we can now track these animals in the wild at an unprecedented spatial and temporal resolution, and very often on a near real-time basis, like the example you can see here. These are these individuals, they are doing goals. I mean, you have been working with this species previously, and we have been monitoring, continuously monitoring these individuals since 2022, and previously also. These individuals that you can see here moving are individuals that were deployed in, I think, 2022 or 2020, I don't remember exactly. And this is thanks to this kind of loggers, this kind of devices you can see here that we call biologgers. These biologgers are able to record GPS position at a high frequency, I mean, at a really good temporal resolution every few minutes. They are also recording many other parameters related to individuals' activity. They have accelerometers, etc. And many of them, depending on the device, many of them are able to connect or to send this information on a real time basis because they are able to connect with this global system for mobile communications. This kind of approaches, the use of these biologgers, is widely spread in seabirds because most of the species are colonial birds. So we can relatively easily access to the breeding colonies during the breeding period. We can access thousands of these individuals. You are invited if you want to the next field season to see these colonies. If we can deal with riesgos laborales and so on, we can do this, but this is relatively easy to do. But I mean, we can. There are a lot of other species that we follow it using these biologgers, as the ones you can see here, or similar biologgers. But seabirds are relatively easy to work with. And I have to be honest. I mean, I've never worked on this topic. This is not my research field. I'm mainly using this tracking data to evaluate how species distribute in space and in time, and how species interact with particular human activities like fisheries, like refuse dams, etc. But we have the data, we have this tracking data, and we have the possibility now to build a project together with you because you have the necessary analytical skills for conducting this kind of analysis. This is an example of the most recent work we have. This is a work that is in progress. During 2022, we deployed many of these devices in all these colonies from Melilla to Barcelona, Torrevieja, Castellón, Delta. And you can see here, maybe you cannot see but because it's quite small, but this is the distribution of these individuals during the breeding period. Of course, this is migratory species. After breeding, they move to Africa. Well, I've said that I've never worked on this topic. This is not exactly true. This is one example of a paper of a PhD student I supervised a few years ago. Here, we were investigating, this is not a migratory movement, this is a foraging movement, the foraging movements of these other species, the Balearic shearwater. This is a highly endangered and endemic species of the Mediterranean. They breed here in the Balearic Island. And in this work, we were interested in identifying the main foraging grounds for this species. And what we saw is that usually they move from the breeding sites to the Spanish Mediterranean coast, to the coast of Catalonia, to the coast of Comunitat Valenciana for foraging. But sometimes they went crazy and they traveled south, reaching areas in the Alboran Sea or even in the coast of Argelia. And we hypothesized that this could be potentially due to the use of winds, because this is a gliding species, it's a especie planeadora, no? They use winds for moving. So what we did was we used a really simple cost function that assumed that tailwinds were the best winds, the most suitable winds for moving, and we transform information on wind conditions into a sort of cost layer with red colors indicating those areas where traveling was most costly, and blue areas, those areas where traveling were less costly. And we saw that these crazy travels to Argelia, or these crazy travels to the Alboran Sea, only occur when the wind conditions were favorable. Otherwise, they always went to the coast of Catalonia or to the coast of Comunitat Valenciana. So somehow these individuals decide where to head, where to go to for foraging, depending on wind conditions. This is not the only examples. There are other examples that use similar approaches for evaluating. In this case, these are not foraging movements. These are migratory movements by these two species here, the black-legged kittiwake and the Atlantic puffin. These guys breed in the north, in these areas here, and every single year undertakes two different kinds of migration. After breeding, during the autumn, this case here, they move southward because they are spending the winter in the north of the Atlantic, in the central North Atlantic. And during the spring, just before the following breeding season, they come back to the breeding colonies. These authors use similar cost function. In this case, this cost function supposed they suppose that the best supported or the best suitable winds are those are a mix between tailwinds and lateral or crosswind. Actually, they calculate this wind support parameter based on this assumption. I mean, when, for example, when winds flows in that direction with respect this animal movement, then wind support was positive. When winds flow in that other direction with respect to animal movement, wind support was negative. And they simply transform information on winds on this parameter on wind support that you can see here in this color gradient with blue colors denoting those areas with the most suitable winds where wind support was more positive, and then they mix they combine this information with information on animal movement, which is denoted here by the size of these arrows. So as you can see here, most of these animals, this species, the animals from this species during the autumn migration, they use those areas where the wind support was more positive, and the same occur during the spring migration when they come back to the breeding colony. And I think it's great because using this kind of information on winds, you can potentially identify migratory routes for this species, which is the basis, for example, for identifying the main threats that they can face while traveling. I mean, I'm talking about fisheries, I'm talking about wind farms, offshore wind farms. But it's also key because migration is a really bottleneck. I mean, most of these species or the population dynamics of these species are highly controlled by what occurred during migration, because they can impact directly through survival of individuals, but they can also impact many other processes, like through a process that we call carryover effects. This is another nice example. This is also a gliding seabird. This is the Corey shearwater. This is a species that mostly reproduce in Canary Island, etc., Micronesia, and they make this kind of migrations. Mostly made this kind of migrations. In this particular work, what it did was to use the exact wind condition in each single transect along these migrations to identify those directions that implies the least cost. And what they observe is that the direction that many of these individuals follow were always the direction that implies the least cost path. So in this way, they were able to identify the least cost routes, what they call the wind highways, between the areas where they breed and the areas where they spend the winter. And when they match or they combine this information on least cost paths or wind highways with information or actual information on this on the movement of these animals, they observe that it was quite a perfect match. And this is also great because doing this kind of analysis, I think you can potentially measure the connectivity, the degree of connectivity between marine regions, important marine regions for this species, like the breeding areas and the wintering areas. And this is more or less what these other authors made in this work. In this time, focus on the terrestrial environment. This is a nice example of what I would like to do together with you. Here, they don't use information on animal tracking. They simply use long time series of information on wind conditions. They combine this information or they integrate this information within a sort of optimization process to identify the main aerial pathways between all those breeding locations here in the north and all those wintering locations here in the south, both during the autumn migration and also during the spring migration. And again, I think this is fascinating because in this way, you can, again, estimate the connectivity between areas. You can estimate also how this connectivity changes based on environmental changes. You can also identify main routes and then the main threats that these guys are facing, etc. And this is pretty much what I would like to do together with you, but in the marine environment. I mean, I would like to combine information on winds or information on ocean currents, whatever, together with information on actual animal tracking to identify how these animals interact with these environmental features to investigate this kind of movement. We could potentially focus at two different scales. At the smaller scales, investigating these foraging movements. At the larger scale, investigating these migratory movements. We could potentially deal with these aims or objectives, like, for example, identifying highways at sea, evaluating how these routes can change in response to environmental changes, assessing how animals are responding to global environmental change, identifying main threats that these guys are facing while traveling, evaluating the degree of connectivities, and evaluating how this connectivity can change in time and how population can respond to these changes. In short, what I would like to do together with you is a Google Maps. It's a sort of Google Maps to identify routes between two different sites. For example, the ICM and the CRM. As you know, Google Maps use information and sort of environmental information like traffic intensity, frequency of public transport to show you the most suitable route, the least cost route, but alternative. I mean, they can also provide with alternative routes, which are also very, very interesting. And as you know, the results, the routes given by Google Maps will depend on the way of transport. It's not the same if you are going by car by train, by bike, whatever. This is because these different forms of transport interact differently with this landscape. And the same occurs for the species. It's not the same if we are talking about flapping seabirds, birds like make like this, or gliding seabirds, like make like this. It's not the same if we are talking about aerial birds or birds that dive, for example, penguins, and it's not the same if we are talking about large whales or marine reptiles, because all these species interact differently with the environment. And potentially, I mean, we could potentially access to data for all these species, to tracking data for all these species, so we potentially could expand this approach to all these species. And that's pretty much all. I just would like to highlight that I try to start this kind of this research line a few years ago in collaboration with a good friend, a good mentor, and an excellent scientist, Jujube Armengol. Unfortunately, he passed away, so this could not be possible. And this is just to highlight that, I mean, I'm really motivated for continuing with this research line that we started a few years ago in collaboration with some of you. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Fran, for this nice talk and your nice words. Comments, questions?
Okay, thank you so much for the talk. It was very inspiring. And actually, in the talk I will give later, we will show some models that we are developing for the Biodiversa project. And these are, let's say, spatial models with a high resolution. I mean, we can have put a lot of information on the mathematical modeling in terms of the places, properties of the seas, habitats. And I have a naive question. So we are interested in taking into account the marine currents, for example, and for example, in the place of Banyuls server that we will explain. So to what extent these currents are constant year by year, or they are predictable? I mean, is there a kind of regular pattern every year, or it's a very complicated thing to model?
Well, I think I'm not the best person to answer this question, because there are many people here that could answer much better than me. I think that there are, obviously, I think you can have some general patterns, but of course, a huge variability between not only between years, between days or between weeks or whatever. I mean, in terms, for example, of winds, I would say that currents could be a little bit more constant, but in case of winds, I mean, they can change in a few minutes. So the variability is huge. That's also a challenge, but I think that the general patterns could be considered, at least considered, quite constant. But I think the challenge here is also to investigate how animals can respond in the short term to this variability. So I think it's a quite nice field of research. So I mean, we can discuss if you want a bit more.
If you are talking about currents in the Mediterranean, these are not so precise and so nice like that was shown in the picture in this talk. One thing is interesting is that the routes, the highways in the Atlantic, you show in this black and white slide. Is the route more suitable for sailing from Canary Islands to Cape Town?
Yeah.
This is just a comment. This is, if you had to sail.
This species works like a sail. I mean,
yes, okay, that's a clear example that if you have to sail from Canary Islands to Cape Town, you should take this highway.
But I guess it depends also on the moment. I mean, it's not the same winter, spring, or whatever.
It's not the same, but it's the more likely route. You'll have troubles in the tropical area, as you show here, that there are several. It's like a bifurcation here in the Cape Verde, in the Cape Verde to the equator. that is probably due to the tropical winds that stop. And so you are without wind. It's a problem, a typical problem of sailing. But this is very nice, very nice picture. And concerning you talk about what region exactly? But Banyuls is very coastal. And you are talking.
So we will explain it. So
Okay, you explain. Okay, let's wait. Let's wait. No.
That's your question. Perhaps you have mentioned, but I have missed the point. You have mentioned you have talked about the connectivity between different regions mediated by the birds.
Sorry, again?
By the birds. The connectivity between different regions. Why is this connectivity important? Of course, well, it's important, but it's important in terms of what? You have birds moving from one region to another, but what do they bring apart of themselves? I don't know. Maybe you are thinking in viruses, bacteria.
There is something, this is a process that is called carryover effect that assumes that what happens in one period within the annual cycle can affect the following event. This is mostly focused on breeding. I mean, migration is a highly costly activity. So depending on the degree of connectivity, the problems that these guys are facing while traveling, for example, to breeding site, they can have consequences on the breeding output. So this kind of connectivity can indirectly affect breeding, reproductive output, and hence population dynamics. This is something called carryover effects, and there's many people working on that. I mean, how the challenges that some individuals are facing during a period, for example, during the breeding period or during migration, can affect reproductions, for example. That's clear. And that's, sorry, I think last week I was talking with you about this kind of data of currents data, because you are working also with this kind of information, and we were talking about the possibility of applying this kind of non-independent data, this tracking data, to do what you are doing, just to show you that this is the data we can offer to you. I mean, this is tracking data, I mean, information, GPS position every 5-10 minutes along the whole year or for a particular period, in case you want it.
More questions, comments?
Hello. Mine are not technical questions.
No.
Okay. Okay. But I'm just curious to know, how do you capture a seagull, and if you choose you choose a male or a female, do you take this into account to put the backpack, or?
It depends on the question you want to answer. I mean, the capture is in the nest. You put a trap in the nest, and then you can easily capture these individuals. It depends on the question. For example, we are working together with Dani Oro. They are also interested in this kind of, not this kind of questions, but similar questions related to the age of individuals. Many of these individuals, many of these Arduino girls, we know the age, so we can just look for the individuals because they are marked with a band. Okay, so we can look for the particular individual we want to capture and just put the trap in the nest.
And then the little backpack is missing forever, no? Once you put it there, then you will never get back again the detector.
It depends on the detector. I mean, these kind of detectors they can be in the Gulf for more or less 2 or 3 years, then it falls. Okay, but this is a nice kind of device because the information is sent by this GCM network. But many years ago, not many, I mean, a few years ago, we were using a kind of loggers that you have to recover. And this is quite more challenge because you have to recover again the individuals. And this kind of devices allows you to follow these individuals along the whole annual cycle. And the other, I mean, the challenge of working with this kind of species is that you can access individuals only during the breeding period. During the winter period, they are in Africa somewhere, and it's quite difficult to capture them again. So
have you tried to capture a female and male and they are a couple?
yes, with the adult gulls, yes, because I think we have examples of couples. I'm not sure, to be honest. But I would say that with adult gulls is possible. With other species, like for example the yellow-legged gulls, it's almost impossible because they learn a lot. I mean, if they see a trap in the nest and they see that the couple is captured, then they never enter the nest. But I think that with adult gulls could be possible.
And I'm also thinking the research about how they, how the relationships are between couples.
I mean, for example, I think, not me, but we have some colleagues that have made something like this with she-otters, because they breed in a burrow, so it's quite easy to capture the couple.
Also, the last thing, because
Yeah,
birds copulate like,
Sorry?
The birds copulate like the male goes on top. So I don't know if you put this in a female, maybe she would be lonely forever. I don't know.
No,
they are afraid of this. I don't know.
More questions?
Yep, I was thinking about the funny comparison you made to the Google Maps. I was going around and thinking, well, maybe it's not exactly the same thing because actually the highway is not always in the same place.
Yeah.
So in fact, there's another layer of information that it would obtain that is probably the way around, that is defining or characterizing wind patterns and things like that from actually the migration of the birds.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense, or is that because I'm thinking that the birds,
Yeah.
I mean, you say the C58, but not everyone will go to the C58, and maybe the C58 would be somewhere in the middle of the Paloma or one of the world, depending on the day, no? And this is an information that could actually be used, assuming that the birds are always intelligent and do the best.
They are very intelligent, but that's the point. I mean, you have to assume that animals' movements are exclusively driven by winds. Maybe this is not the case. I mean, for example, food availability can play also a role, predators, whatever. But I think most of in general terms, the movement is highly driven by winds. But then there are some confounding factors, if you want to say like this, that can potentially shape this kind of movement. But this is a really nice question, an interesting question, yeah.